You ever wonder why two people, both smart, both using the exact same AI, can get completely different results? One person gets this generic, totally useless response, while the other gets a brilliant, spot-on analysis. This isn't luck, and it's definitely not magic. It's because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're actually doing when we prompt an AI. It all comes down to architecture. So let's deconstruct the system. And that right there, that's the core idea of this whole explainer. We're not just asking questions. We're not just having a conversation with a machine. To get great results, you have to realize that you are the architect. Your prompt, that's the blueprint.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at that common pattern of getting inconsistent results. Then we're going to dive deep into the three core mechanics that really control AI outputs: precision, structure, and context. After that, we'll talk about the real-world cost of getting this wrong, and we'll wrap up by exploring the mindset that separates the expert from everyone else. Okay, let's start with a feeling I'm pretty sure we've all had. You've got this incredibly powerful tool at your fingertips, but the output is completely hit or miss. This isn't just you. It's a systemic pattern that shows up in every single field where AI is being used. Think about a software engineer for a second. They ask an AI for a code snippet. What they get back looks right, but buried inside is a subtle, really hard-to-spot bug. The syntax is perfect, but the logic is just off. And sometimes being almost right is even worse than being completely wrong. Or what about a researcher? They feed a super dense report to an AI and ask for a synthesis. The result? A shallow, almost high school-level book report that misses every single important nuance. It describes what the text says, but it doesn't give any insight into what it means. And yeah, it absolutely affects creative work too. A marketer asks for some ad copy, and the draft comes back missing the brand's voice, or it just doesn't get the core message of the campaign. The pattern is crystal clear. The failure isn't in the tool's potential. It's in how we're interacting with it. So let's get into the mechanics of why this keeps happening. First up, the precision mechanism. This is probably the most important thing to get your head around. An AI doesn't understand you like a person does. It predicts. It lives in a world of probabilities, and your job is to make that world as small as possible. This is the engine under the hood. At its very core, a large language model is just an incredibly sophisticated what word comes next machine. Based on the words you give it, it calculates the most statistically likely word to come next, and then the next, and the next. It's not thinking, it's just sampling from a probability distribution that you created with your prompt. And this shows you exactly what happens. On the left, a vague prompt like "summarize this document" creates high entropy. Think of it as a ton of informational randomness. This gives the model a huge field of possible answers, so it just plays it safe and gives you a generic, average response. But on the right, when you add specific constraints, you shrink that field. You create low entropy. This forces the model down a very narrow path toward the targeted output you actually wanted. So precision isn't about being polite to the AI. It's about mathematically locking down the output space. Okay, let's move on to our second mechanic, structure. And you'll see how this builds on the first. If precision narrows down the possibilities, structure gives the AI the blueprint for how to assemble them. The format of your prompt directly controls the shape of the AI's response. There's a great term for this: cognitive scaffolding. When you use things like bullet points, or you tell the AI to act in a certain role, or you give it a grading rubric, you're not just adding some stylistic flair. You're actually giving the model a mental framework. You're building a scaffold that guides its internal reasoning process from your input to its output. And this just illustrates the difference perfectly. An unstructured conversational prompt is a very loose frame. Sure, the output might be creative, but it's also going to be highly variable, super unpredictable. A structured prompt, though, one with clear sections, headings, rules, that creates a rigid frame. This massively lowers the variance, which makes the output so much more reliable and consistent. You're basically pre-formatting the model's entire thought process. Our third and final mechanic is context, and this might be the most misunderstood of all. See, providing context doesn't make the AI smarter. What it does is give the AI a temporary working memory. It grounds its probabilistic guessing in the specific reality of your task. So without context, the model is forced to fill in what are called inference gaps. It has to guess. It has to guess about your goals, your audience, your constraints, and when it guesses, it just pulls from its gigantic but very generic training data. And that often leads to things that sound plausible, but are just flat out wrong, what we call hallucinations. This slide shows the stark difference. With low context, the model is just making its best guess based on its generic training. But when you provide high context, you give it examples, data, specific vocabulary, past decisions, you anchor its generation process. You're not asking it to invent things from scratch. You're asking it to reason based on the evidence you've provided. And because of that, its output becomes way more relevant and way more accurate. So we've gone through the three core mechanics. But what happens when we just ignore them? What's the real tangible cost of all this ambiguity? Well, it's not some single dramatic failure. It's more like a slow, grinding accumulation of instructional misalignment. The cost is paid by all of us, really. It's the professional who wastes hours reprompting and editing. It's the developer who blames the model for a bug that was actually caused by a vague instruction. It's the creator who feels like they're drowning in revisions. And it's the analyst who ends up trusting a shallow summary without realizing it. Every single one of these is a failure of architecture, a breakdown in precision, structure, or context. Now, of course, this is a conceptual number, but it really highlights this massive hidden tax on our productivity. Just imagine reclaiming even a little bit of the time we all waste going back and forth on bad outputs, simply because the initial input wasn't architected correctly. The cost of ambiguity is very, very real. And that brings us to the solution: adopting the architect's mindset. This is the big shift. The expert user isn't just typing differently. They are thinking differently. They approach prompting less like a conversation and more like an engineering discipline. So here's what that expert mental workflow looks like. And notice how much of this happens before they even type a single word. First, they figure out their core intent. Then, they design the structural frame. They decide how precise they need to be. Are they exploring or are they executing? And critically, they always treat outputs as drafts and they build in verification loops. They never trust the AI blindly. So as we close this out, I want to leave you with a few questions to think about in your own process. First off, just how precise are your instructions? Are you leaving the AI with this huge, messy field of possibilities, or are you actually narrowing its path to the outcome you need? Second, what kind of frame are you giving the AI? Are you providing that cognitive scaffolding, the lists, the roles, the rules, that it needs to structure its response in a reliable way? Or are you just kind of tossing it out there and hoping for the best? And finally, this is maybe the most important question of all. What are you not telling it? What crucial context, what inference gaps are you forcing the model to invent for itself because you just haven't provided the necessary information? The quality of the output isn't in the model. It's in the architecture of your input.